money coulda buy. Rich man a live, poor coulda die. Can't take it, no. No, 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 I can't take it, no. No, 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 no. The rich man a poor man a bigger man thief. But the liar a doctor a Indian thief. But the rich man a poor man a bigger man thief. Liar a doctor a Indian thief. Life was a thief.
Action News Network is an Aboriginal American media network. As such, we are protected under the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People or DRIP Articles 8, 14, and 16. Action News Network is allowed to provide Aboriginal news and media content on non-Indigenous media platforms free of oppressive censorship. Any breach of this protection is a breach of international law.
Biff Thurston III, once again holding down Action News Network with a disclaimer of sorts. Now let us be clear, Action News Network supports the efforts of so-called Black Americans in their struggle for a permanent remedy for their current situation. One problem that so-called Black Americans face is a lack of knowledge to how law works and the lack of being educated in language of law. Since so-called Black Americans accept a minority status in public as whole as a group, they accepted terms of subordination to their majority, deeming such people unfit to govern or represent themselves. Think about the reparations hearing. Did you choose these people to represent your cause? Was that panel the best and brightest of your people? Also, accepting the title of a person of color admits to any legal authority that you are an entity of lesser and unethical character, not to be trusted, with no standing in law. Reparations is much to do about nothing. A real committee should have been years in the making. A non-profit organization should have been created, with an elected president and an elected panel of historians, mental health experts, educators, law enforcement officials, politicians and religious leaders representing a broad range in the so-called Black American community. Instead you got Mr. from the color purple, and a dude who dances on the one train in his briefs, an utter embarrassment.
100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. And finds himself in exile in his own land. And finds himself in exile in his own land.
So we all heard what Dr. King said, exiles in our own homeland. So let's look into breaking that statement down. What is an exile? Noun, the state of being barred from one's native country, typically for political or punitive reasons. As a verb, it's expel and bar someone from their native country, typically for political and punitive reasons, right? So, but he didn't just say exile, he said exile in our own homeland. It's one thing to be an exile, but to be exiled in your own homeland. We look at the etymology verb. I like to break down words in multiple different, using multiple different platforms. So etymology online, circa 1300s, from Old French, exilier, exile, banish, expel, drive off. 12th century, from late Latin, exilare and exilare, from Latin exilium, banishment, exile, place of exile, from exul, banished person, from ex, away. Alright, you can see other Greek words there, but also it says the Pi word al, to wander, Greek alamai, to wander, stray, or to roam about. So wanderers, right? The noun, etymology from circa 1300s, forced removal from one's country. Old French, exil, 12th century, from Latin exilium, banishment, place of exile. All right, so basically removed from one's country.
Aborigines, which means what? Black folks. You never find a white aborigine. Aborigines are called natives, or they're always dark-skinned people. You and I are aborigines, but you don't like to be called an aborigine. You and I are aborigines, but you don't like to be called an aborigine. You and I are aborigines, but you don't like to be called an aborigine.
So by now, many of you should already know about Walter Plecker. Here's a meme that kind of explains everything about Walter Plecker in under 30 seconds. You know, the man who was responsible for the destruction of the records in 1913 in 50 states, that showed how Native Americans were reclassified as black, Negro, and colored in the first U.S. Census, right? So this is a study into Native American history, 1920s eugenics in Virginia. Dr. Plecker's attempt to white out Native American race by Sue Peoples. It's a funny ass fucking name, Sue Peoples. She's the co-chair of the Gathering Education Committee. The state of Virginia established, well, really the Commonwealth of Virginia. So the Commonwealth of Virginia established the Bureau of Vital Statistics in 1912, ensuring all babies born in Virginia received a birth certificate that included a racial designation. Dr. Walter Ashby Plecker, who lived from 1861 to 1947, was instated as the head of this organization because of his work with mid-white education and helping to bring better health practices to the poor. So he was a racist in the eugenics, right? And he was helping to bring better health practices to the poor. So who were the poor then, especially in the South, because he was in Virginia, right? I always often say that our ancestors and even our more recent, our great-grandparents and stuff, great-great-grandparents, those who lived in the late 1800s, early 1900s and stuff, they lived better than us. They were more well-educated. They had more self-pride. They had wealth. They owned land. They owned businesses. And if you look now, many of us can look back at our great-grandparents and stuff and how they was entrepreneurs and stuff, and how, you know, something happened and now that wealth was taken away from them and shit. So this man who was obviously a racist, a bigot, eugenicist, a genocider, if he's trying to help the poor, that means the majority of the poor people in the South were whites. When the Racial Integrity Act was passed in 1924, Plecker's focus shifted from the health and hygiene to racial classification. The doctrine of eugenics, the belief that a pure race contributed to a more stable society, was advocated by Dr. Plecker, which led to a white supremacy agenda within Virginia's statistical record keeping. In the Bureau's perspective, there was only two races: white, which prided such persons who had no trace of any other than Caucasian blood, and colored, the catch-all term for anything in between. Due to the limits of law and its one-drop rule, Native Americans in Virginia were considered colored and not able to claim their Native American identity, even though the Racial Integrity Act had one exception, because many white Virginians consider themselves descendants of Pocahontas and John Rolfe. That's the sons and daughters of Pocahontas. Bullshit. So this was actually a way of usurping the Native American title by these people who wanted to be or claim rights to land and stuff, but didn't want to be considered black or colored or Indian or whatever, right? So they wanted to be the only people to be considered Indian, and the only way they could do that was to make sure the real Indians were classified as something else because of stupid assumptions and shit. I really think that they did bring a few, or they were doing the practice of bringing African slaves here. There's just very few of them. The whole thing is because you couldn't tell the difference between a lot of these African slaves and the Aboriginal American people, us here in America, that it gave them an excuse to basically say, well, since we can't really tell the difference between these two groups, and there's no way of determining who should be given reparations or their land, or who we should respect treaties for. I believe a lot of blacks was running around free. You had a few who was being brought here from Africa to replace a lot of the white slaves that were now gaining their freedom through law and all this other shit as they gain more prominence. And eventually, with not enough slave labor, with all these whites not getting out of slavery and them bringing a small amount of Africans here, I think they just started, like the plantations were like jails almost too, so they started just throwing black people, and there was all the black codes and shit. They started throwing a lot of these Aboriginal blacks into these plantations, and they would intermix with a lot of these Africans and shit who were there, and so forth and so on. And because of that, they were saying that there's no way to hell to tell the difference between the two. It's just an excuse. It wouldn't have been that hard to tell who's who. Especially if these niggas was walking around like Kunta Kinte, with that Mandinga talk, right? Like we seen in Roots, made up story, but there's some truth to, the period time. Not only did Plecker advocate the current records to indicate either white or colored, he also amended racial classification to the records prior to 1924. Indicating Indian would change the color, certain that there was no descendants of Virginia Indians claiming or reputed to be Indians who are unmixed with Negro blood. He didn't have no proof of that. He just made an assumption based off of a loophole, and they found a loophole and he ran with it. And this model was used all across America, and it's still used to this day. All right, if you couldn't tell the Native American Indians from Negros you was bringing from Africa, and that means one thing. That means that they were the same. They basically the same. So the Indians here were black. Not the motherfuckers that you see now in charge of these. Not call them organizations because they're not tribes. So we look at how these explorers from Europe, when they came to America, how they described and depicted the Indians out here. So America, Black Carolina Indians, the Fiend, the written record of voyage of 1524 of Giovanni de Verrazano, as recorded in a letter to Francis I, King of France, July 8, 1524, the Black Carolina Indians, adapted from a translation from Susan Terrell of the Celer Codex. All right, the voyages of Giovanni de Verrazano. So here's this account. It says they go completely naked around. Naked except that around their loins they wear skins of small animals like martens, with a narrow belt of grass around their body, to which they tie various tails of other animals which hang down to their knees. The rest of the body is bare, and so is the head. Some of them wear garlands of birds' feathers. They are dark in color. Comment some use the word black. It's up to the translator, who is oftentimes a racist albino in Kemet, not unlike the Ethiopians. And we showed that the whole of Africa was being called Ethiopia, which we know from Greek means the burnt-faced people, with thick black hair, not very long, tied behind their head like a small tail. So they didn't have this long, flowing hair that's being depicted by the people who are sitting in proxy. As for the physique of these men, they are well proportioned, of medium height, a little taller than we are. They have broad chests, strong arms, and their legs and other parts of the body were well composed. There's nothing else except that they tend to be rather broad in the face, but not at all For we saw many with angler faces, they have big black eyes. So they saying they seen motherfuckers with big noses, big lips, and niggas with skinny noses and thin lips or whatever, just like we have today. So these people in our community that we kind of joke about having white features and stuff because they family mix a little too much with white people is totally false and inaccurate. We proved many times that the white gene is it's not dominant, it's actually recessive, and unless you have a direct white relative, up until about your grandparents' line, you shouldn't really be able to tell that you had a white admixture unless you're a direct mulatto or the child of mulatto. There's no way that your great-great-grandparent was white and everybody else married black and you still come out high yellow with these features. It just doesn't happen. We have to stop kidding ourselves with that. It also says they are not very strong. So it says they have broad chest, strong arms and legs and other parts, but they become down here, but they're not very strong. But they have a sharp cunning, which means they are smart as a whip, and are agile, swift runners. So who's agile and swift runners? Blacks in the United States and in the Caribbean, blacks of America in general, always tend to be among the fastest people in the world. The only other people who come close is from Central Africa. So like Nigeria and Kenya and shit. So supposedly we descend from West Africa. Most black people in America are very good runners, very quick, and have a lot of stamina. But we don't never see like Ghana or Benin in the Olympics winning, the championships, in races. But let's continue. From what we can tell from observation in the last two respects, they resemble Orientals, particularly those from the farthest Saharian regions. Now, when they say Orientals, they don't mean just the Mongols. You gotta understand, at this time, most of Indochina, most of southern Cathay, like the Hong Kong area, and the islands off the coast were still inhabited by Negritos and other, which you would call Indo or Indus people. So, a lot of Mongols didn't come down into Cathay, into Inner Mongolia and stuff like that, into Cathay, which is now China, into like the 1700s and shit. And I'm still working on that information. I'm from New York. It says New Netherlanders, Apparel, Modern, New England, Delaware Peninsula, Cape Cod, New York, New Jersey, Delaware, and Connecticut. So these are the Indians from New York. Alright? Notice how they look. Alright? Around the same time Walter Plecker was changing everybody's birth certificates around with this great idea of his for vital statistics, they started changing these books around too. In 1939, writer Agatha Christie, also it was 1939, wow, published a book called 10 Little Niggers. Later editions sometimes changed the name to 10 Little Indians, and then there was none. But as late as 1978, copies of the book with the original title was still being produced. It was not rare for sheet music produced in the first half of the 20th century to use the word nigga on the cover. So this article basically tells you that this book was written and they were using nigga and Indian basically interchangeable. Alright, and you also get Sambo a lot if you look at minstrels and shit, and it means a black person, but historically it's a person of mixed race, especially a black, Indian, and European blood. But when you look at what a Sambo is depicted of, well, in India, they used to call them Sambo too, You know what I'm saying? So that's something you need to look at too. I know you see a white looking blue-eyed, dude in Hindustani dress, but in Hindustan, that place, East India, whatever, they called, the whites called a lot of those people over there Sambos. But here in America, the Sambo always been this. So this dark-skinned person with these big red lips, is that a depiction of a mixed race person to you? Just let me know. Does it? And I love how it says sign of a good detective novel. Like this was like standard reading for kids and shit. Crazy. Real quick, this is an English dictionary from the United Kingdom, Oxford, OED. We use it here in the United States, but it's our standard dictionary is Webster. We use Oxford almost as an etymology dictionary tool because it's what's used in England, which is where supposedly the mother tongue comes from, right? So it tells you some of the uses of it. But we're gonna see census referring to people with dark skinned person of sub-Saharan African origin. I'm not gonna read all of this stuff. I'm just gonna read because they give you the definition and then they give you like examples of it. So I'll go down to the bottom. Used by people who are not black as a relatively neutral or occasionally positive term with no specifically hostile intent. It shows you examples of that shit. Not going to go into all of this over here all day. At the top, C, used by black people as a neutral or favorable term. A person, here at the top, a person who does menial labor. Any person considered to be of low social status. Get that. B, a person whose behavior is regarded as reprehensible. A dark-skinned person of any origin, early U.S., usually with reference to American Indians, usually offensive. Now, what Indians do you know running around America being called nigger and taking that as an offensive term? So again, these are more examples of people that were here who were not of African blood, but can be confused with Africans, and words being used to describe both people here in America. So there we go again, because again, the Indians that they show us now, they wouldn't be called niggers by people walking around right now, and they wouldn't take it as being offensive because they would say that it doesn't refer to them. You know what I'm saying? And we can see some of let's actually do the example here. Heathen Indian niggers, the relationship between Polynesian niggers, the native genealogy. Let's see if any more down here talking about. Okay, so B, an Australian, an Aborigine. New Zealand, a Morai, another Aborigine. Even though the Morai now are not, the same people who were the Aborigines there. So here we just showed you a whole bunch of examples of why claiming to be descendant of African slaves, it's not really going to cut it. Now, if you went with we're the Aboriginal slaves of America and shit, you might have a better case. Now they can't laugh that off, but you would have to bring all this shit together. Y'all just saying based off of what they've been telling you, and they're not going to tell you that they've been lying, but they're just going to brush you off until you get it. You understand what I'm saying? So that's real quick. I don't want to keep everybody too long. Thanks for tuning in. Y'all know what to do.
To me, when you say Africans, when you say that, I think you speaking English. As me as an African, when you say Africa, I know you speaking English. So first of all, black Americans in US, whatever, okay, seems like you are a little bit confused about Africa and other stuff. Because when you say Africa, first of all, what you have to know that you speak in English. So if you have any question, the question will be like, what Africans we call Africa? Okay. Now you know that Africa is not only one country. Okay. Africa is many countries. Okay. But every country have a name that they call Africa. Every country. Okay? Every country have the name that they call Africa. Okay? Okay, for instance, what Ghana call Africa? Ghana call Africa a Bibli. Okay? So right now, if you tell my mom, okay, my mom is old. If you tell my mom Africa, my mom don't know where Africa is. You don't know what is Africa.